Mayor, we are live now.
Thank you. Call to order a council work session for September 8th, 2020. Is the clerk on this meeting to call the roll? I don't think so. So I will note that all members of the council are present with the exception of Mr. Preston, who we expect to join momentarily.
Mayor, I'm just gonna disconnect for a moment, connect with Vasu, because I'm wondering if that person in the waiting room is actually our clerk fill-in. So I'm gonna mute myself and it could be Teresa, because Teresa's filling in for Angie this evening.
She said it was someone named Carl.
Yeah, I'll find out what phone
Okay.
Teresa's calling in from.
So we're going to hold for a minute.
I apologize, group, that the person in the waiting room was in fact our clerk substitute. It's Teresa, so she is now being led into the meeting, and so she'll be joining us momentarily. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Again, I don't see a need to call the roll. We've identified all council members present except Mr. Preston, who we expect to join shortly. We do have one public commenter. Vasu or Alondre, would you let that person in?
I have admitted them to the room. Just waiting for them to connect.
Okay. And Mr. Ulmer, you know the rules well. State your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes for comment.
He is muted.
You're muted, Mr. Ulmer. It could be your computer volume that needs to be adjusted. Trust me, I've been there myself.
All right, now can you hear me?
If you could turn that up just a little bit louder, I think we'd be good.
Can you hear me now?
Got you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Once Connect Transit made the decision to purchase only large buses for fixed bus routes, necessitating moving the bus stops out to the streets away from the destination, ridership decreased, and Connect Transit will devour more taxpayer money in perpetuity. Bus stop shelters, lighting, and all those things will not bring passengers back. Riding the bus is no longer convenient or even a possibility for many in the need of public transportation. Have you observed people waiting on the curb on the former Bergner side of Eastland Drive for a bus during a rainstorm to go home after an appointment at OSF? I observed them getting soaked. Additionally, crossing busy Eastland Drive with no crosswalk or curb cuts is hazardous. I've written you several times about throwing money at the long outdated fixed route model of public transit, and it's throwing money, taxpayer money, down a bottomless pit. I'm terribly disappointed by the lack of creativity by the council, mayor, staff, and Connect Transit board and staff. No matter how many millions of taxpayer money Connect Transit Monster consumes, Connect Transit always needs more money and more money for fewer passengers. The cost per passenger has risen dramatically. Please cut off Connect Transit Monster's head that is ever consuming increasing amounts of taxpayer money. Please more wisely subsidize the passengers' use of ride services that provide the service desired. End.
That concludes our public comment. Welcome, Mr. Preston. And
Thank you. Sorry, Wi-Fi issue. My apologies.
tonight's work session is to talk about potential of a motor fuel tax increase, and staff has done some research and a presentation for us, and then we'll go into discussion. So I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Reese.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, this evening we would like to talk to you about the local motor fuel tax. Finance Director Andrew Hune has a very brief presentation. We want to speak with you about the history, a little bit of the history of our local motor fuel tax, the revenue we have come to receive from our 4-cent tax, and discuss briefly, get your thoughts on the potential for parity with Bloomington. Bloomington is at 8 cents. We are at 4 cents per gallon. Some people refer to it as a different, there's assumptions occasionally that it's a percentage number, things like that. It's actually an actual cent. 4 cents is what we currently assess. Bloomington assesses 8. And so we wanted to have a discussion with council so we can have information on whether or not we want to proceed with a local motor fuel tax increase as we finalize the fiscal year 21-22 budget process and can plan accordingly. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Finance Director Andrew Hune, who has a few PowerPoint slides and some comments to share with you, and then we will open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Pam. Could everyone see that screen, the PowerPoint? Great.
Looks great.
We have a few slides to go through. It'll be fairly quick. But Pam, as Pam mentioned, we want to kind of get your feel for direction. We're going to talk a lot about the components that make up the cost components for the gas, gallon of gas.
Andrew?
Do some analysis.
Andrew,
Yes. Yes.
you're going to have to speak a little closer, closer to your microphone.
Okay.
We can't hear you very well.
How about now?
That's better.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we're going to cover a few things in the presentation. We're going to talk about the cost components for a gallon of gas. We're going to do some comparison between Bloomington and Normal, obviously the revenue that we collect, and then some proposed use of that new revenue if we were to seek a 4-cent increase. The slide before you right now gives you a sense of the different current cost components of a gallon of gas here in Illinois and in Normal. So say if it was $2.50 per gallon you're paying at the pump, obviously the lion's share of that, the blue part of the pie chart, is the actual retail price of the gas you're paying. In this case, it'd be $1.73, about 70% of your total bill for the $2.50 gallon. The next biggest piece is the state motor fuel tax at 38 cents. That, of course, is what we refer to as motor fuel tax, the MFT fund. That's the money the state collects through their tax and share with municipalities through a per capita formula. And then that goes into the special revenue fund for the town, motor fuel tax fund. And that funds only road, bridges, and that kind of work. It's restricted to that nature. And also, you probably recall it was 19 cents from 1990 on, and then the state increased it by 19 cents on July 1st of 2019. The next biggest piece is the federal motor fuel tax. That's 18.4 cents, about 8% of that 250. That's been in that case since 1993. And then there's also a retail sales component, sales tax for the state, sales tax for the town. And you can see city local motor fuel tax, that 4 cents, that's what we are currently at right now for the town Normal. That's about 2% of the actual total bill. And the state has 2 more areas they fund certain things for gas. One's an environmental tax and an underground storage tank tax. They're both pretty small. Sorry about that. They're both pretty small, but they only register as 1%. So that kind of gives you a feel for the overall. If you're paying $2.50 per gallon, then you can see kind of where those cost components are coming from. Obviously, the line shares from the retail price from the vendor itself, and then the taxes down the line there. The 4-cent tax that the town has right now, we put that into the budget effective July 1st of 2015. It raises about $1 million a year for us. As you know, Bloomington did that about a year earlier with the 4-cent tax, and then they just recently in May of 2019 increased it to 8 cents. We've been kind of curious about rates and consumption practices with that, because obviously a lot of what we hear sometimes is if Bloomington's rates, if Bloomington has a tax rate of 4 cents higher than normal, then their gas per gas gallon will be more expensive, and everyone will go to normal to get gas. So we thought we'd kind of flesh that out a little bit. So we did do some analysis. I wouldn't call it super scientific, but I think the data is very clear and I think appropriately collected. We went ahead and starting with May 1st of 2019, that's the effective date of Bloomington increasing their local motor fuel tax from 4 to 8. We looked at a period of time between May 2nd and basically near the early March of 2020. So we looked at 98 different days of gas prices in the community, both in Bloomington and Normal. We basically took the top 10 station prices for one day, for that same day for Normal, and the same day top 10 prices in Bloomington, averaged those to a single amount to kind of do a comparison. So we looked at 98 different days. 79 times Bloomington was actually lower than Normal. And this is when Bloomington has a higher 4 cent tax rate on their gas than we do in Normal. We're at 4, they're at 8. 7 times we were both equal the same. 12 times Normal was actually lower than Bloomington. But on average for that entire period, Bloomington actually had 3 cents less a gallon than it was in Normal. So we kind of found that kind of interesting. And that actually aligns pretty well with what we heard previously from different gas station vendors, that for the most part, a few cents here and there don't drive a lot of the gas prices they charge. Different market factors make that decision. Now, at certain price points, you will start to see it being passed on to the consumer, but in this case, most of them weren't doing that. And then this next chart here kind of shows graphically what I just described to you, those 98 days from May 2nd, 2019 to basically March 6th. The red line is the gas price that day for the average of the top 10 stations compared to Normals. The blue line, and you can see historically they were always pretty much below when we took note of them. You can see the big increase on July 1st, 2019 for both communities. That was obviously represented by the 19-cent increase from the state motor fuel tax. That obviously was going to impact because it was a significant amount. But what we're finding is, 4 to 8 cents don't have that much of an impact on the actual rate. And also, we looked at kind of consumption. This chart here shows you, the red line is Bloomington's monthly collection of gas tax, and Normal is the blue line. We took a calendar year from 2019, and you can see on May 1st, 2019, Bloomington increased their tax rate 4 cents from 4 to 8. We kept ours obviously the same at 4. That basically doubled the income they were bringing in from their gas stations, and that stayed pretty steady for the rest of that period. And ours stayed very steady for the rest of that period. So we didn't see any kind of migration per se between the two communities on a 4 cent gas tax increase. And in fact, on average, the Normal was actually lower. Bloomington was actually lower than Normal most of that time we analyzed. This chart just essentially shows the revenue that we collect currently for our 4 cent gas tax. You can see we implemented it on July 1st of 2015. So we did have quite a full fiscal year there in fiscal year 15-16. About almost $800,000 were collected. The next year we got up over $1 million, of course, because we had a full year of the 4 cent per gallon tax rate every single month. In 17-18, we had a small drop off. And this is what we're going to typically see anyway. when we talk to other municipalities that put a gas tax in, and what we've seen and what Boonton has seen, is you start to see a slow decrease of that revenue. And it's a function of a lot of things, but primarily it's just more cars are more fuel efficient and so forth. You might see this increase as electric cars come on more, but that's not really impacting us that much. In 18-19, we had another drop off. That was actually a result of one of the gas stations closing down. They closed down in August of 2018 and have not reopened yet. So we had kind of a full year of a pretty good provider not getting a tax from them because they weren't in business. And then in 1920, kind of two things happened there. One, we had a full year of that business not open for that entire 12 months, which has impact on our revenue. And then also March, last month of the fiscal year, we had a decrease in locomotive fuel tax, fairly sizable due to COVID and the shutdown period. So you can see that typically we're in a good year where all gas stations are open and running well, and a post-COVID or pre-COVID economy, we're probably about $1 million a year in revenue from a 4-cent gas tax. So basically 1 cent of locomotive fuel tax is about $250,000. If we were to increase from 4 to 8 and have some parity with, or have parity with Bloomington, we have another $1 million of estimated revenue coming in. Now, where would that revenue go? It would be considered new revenue for the budget process. And right now, that's one thing staff's looking for from your guidance, in addition to increasing it, but we're probably looking at making more of a transportation investment. This, of course, would be everything we do for the roadway, capital, operating, anything that has or looks like a transportation investment, we would basically funnel that money towards that. That's kind of a quick synopsis of the information. I had to address any questions on the slides, but that kind of brings you up to speed in terms of the revenue, and what we're suggesting is essentially to move from 4 to 8 with parity of Bloomington, and then use the funds for additional transportation investment needs. And I'll turn it back to the mayor or City Manager Reese.
Mr.
All right.
Hume. Ms. Reese, do you have further comments?
I was just going to chime in with some of the comments that Mr. Hune pointed out, that what we believe we can pull from the data is that a 4-cent change in the locomotive fuel tax does not change consumer behavior. It didn't change where people are going to acquire their fuel and fuel up their vehicles. And so at this point, we would like to propose that council consider a 4-cent increase to become comparable to Bloomington in that regard. And that does present some opportunities for us to invest in our transportation network. And you know, I appreciate council's time in discussing this. We originally brought this up during our budget work session back in January. So it's taken a while to get to this point, but we are finally here. So I'm just going to look forward to council discussion, and we'll address any questions council members may have.
Ms. Smith, we'll start with you.
Yes, thank you. Two questions. When the initial fuel tax was implemented in 2015, at that time, was there a restriction to limit the use of those funds to transportation projects? And a sub question on that is, could you compare that to the use of state motor fuel taxes? And are there different types of restrictions between how normal views using motor fuel tax proceeds compared to the requirements the state places us for the use of their tax proceeds? And could you provide some examples of specifically paving and repair projects? Because I know there has been some discontent expressed among some local residents as to where streets are paved or get repairs. And I'd like an opportunity to just air that information here while people are listening. Thank you.
Sure. I'll try to remember that series of questions, and if I miss any of them, please remind me. I will let Mr. Otto or Mr. Hune kind of articulate the restrictions that we have when we're spending state dollars. The motor fuel tax fund, which are the monies that we receive from the state, those are restricted. We can use those for certain projects that meet certain criteria. Typically, those are large projects. They can be bridges, they can be traffic signals. And I'll defer to Mr. Otto in a moment to articulate the specifics of that. In regard to the original 4-cent local motor fuel tax that council adopted in 2015, Mr. Hune can correct me if I'm wrong. I went back and looked at minutes and old video today. I didn't see where council made that earmark, made the assumption with our original 4-cent local motor fuel tax. So I haven't found that it was initially implemented for the sole reason of road and transportation projects. Mr. Hune, can you clarify?
Sure. No, that's accurate. The state motor fuel tax is by statute restricted to spend a certain category, as Pam mentioned, and Ryan can explain that much better. The local motor fuel tax, the 4 cents that the town can assess, is not restricted. It can be spent on whatever the town council wishes to spend it on. With the original 4 cents, Pam mentioned that we didn't necessarily earmark that money for road work. However, during that time period, we did create what we refer to today as the roadway fund. And the general fund transfers money to the roadway fund every single year. The transfer is around $900,000 to $1 million a year from general fund. So in a way that those funds flow from general fund to the roadway fund for road projects, but it wasn't specifically earmarked to be that way. But that's how it's resulted in the budget process due to the nature of the funds.
So in policy, there wasn't a specific limitation on the original motor fuel tax when it was passed, but in practice, of say $1 million, 90% of it has been earmarked for transportation purposes. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, I would say that's accurate.
Okay, and then
I'm sorry.
I may have another
No,
question.
I was actually going to say we spend significantly more than that. So
Right.
just wanted to make that clear.
Okay, but normal's definition of transportation goes beyond just roads. And should I allow Ryan, Mr. Otto, to expand on what might fall in that category?
I'd be happy to. The state motor fuel tax, we get MFT dollars from the state each year, and those funds are restricted to transportation related projects. The difference really between town funds or local motor fuel tax and the state motor fuel tax is how much we have to spend in testing, inspection, permitting, and design to spend the state dollars. There's some significant increases in costs when we do projects under state motor fuel tax because of the increased regulation and inspection that's required of us to spend those monies. So a lot of times we use those projects or larger projects. For instance, the most recent one is our Glen Avenue Bridge and our MFT resurfacing project that's going on right now. Those projects require a higher level of inspection, higher level of testing to be done to satisfy the state requirements. So we have a little more flexibility with the local motor fuel tax dollars and can be a little more flexible with those.
Mr. Otto, I'm going to put you on the spot and see if you can recall some of the street resurfacing projects that we may have addressed in the last year or two with our just the town funds, not the motor fuel tax funds.
Sure, with just town funds, the ones that come to mind were last year's general resurfacing projects. We accomplished the Parkway Plaza resurfacing near the Normal Walmart from Veterans up to Greenbrier. We also resurfaced Cottage Avenue from Sanderson up to Gregory Street. Those are the two streets that we did last year under local motor fuel tax or roadway fund, as Mr. Hune mentioned. This year we are have a significant local resurfacing program that included Karen Drive, Kingswood area work, and several other local streets that were done just this summer.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, while the state motor fuel tax limits what type of projects those proceeds can be used on, it is also coming with some unfunded mandates in the form of additional engineering studies and so forth that we are obligated to pay for if we want to access the state motor fuel tax. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the local motor fuel tax gives us the flexibility to access the the state motor fuel tax, while at the same time providing us an expanded definition of what qualifies as a transportation project beyond roads and includes sidewalks. What else might our local motor fuel tax be used for beyond road resurfacing, new construction, and sidewalks?
Ms. Smith, I'm going to ask you to hold that question. You've reached your 10-minute limit.
Okay.
According to the first rules of order, and we'll come back. There are other people in the queue here, and I want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to speak.
Well, I'm going to leave my hand up in case my questions aren't answered by the next participants. Thank you.
I would ask that you take it down and then reinstitute it. That way it'll put it in the right order. Mr. Preston.
Thanks, Mayor. Mr. Hune had mentioned earlier, and this is a question for him or Ms. Reese, that when Bloomington instituted the increase from 4 to 8 cents in May of 2019, that from that time, looking over the following 14 or 15 months, there was Bloomington gas prices overall still averaged lower than normals a vast majority of the time. Why is that? Does staff have any thought as to the reasoning behind, even with the 4-cent difference, why it is that Bloomington's prices tend to be cheaper than normals?
That's a very good question, Mr. Preston. The only thing we have learned is it's just market driven. So it's what the market will bear in a certain area, and based on each individual fueling location, each individual gas station. And for example, there could be a number of gas stations with the same firm. Like, for example, I'll use Casey's as an example. All of the Casey's will generally have different pricing. So it's just what the market will bear in that area.
I would
Mr.
add to
Hune,
that,
go ahead.
Mr. Preston, that we observed this happening the last time there was a gas tax increase, that the 4 cents that Bloomington initiated, it was 8 months before we implemented our 4-cent sales tax, and the exact same thing happened. Prices were predominantly, over a period of time, predominantly lower than the city of Bloomington.
Do we have another follow-up question for staff? Do we have any data of the comparison of gas prices between Bloomington and Normal prior to Bloomington raising theirs from 4 to 8 when we were both at 4 cents?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Hune.
We didn't actually track it back then. When we went to 4 cents from 0, we did kind of ad hoc track some of it, not as we did so much this last time, and we didn't see any increase at all. In fact, I contacted a few of the gas station owners at the time, about a month after we had implemented the 4-cent increase, and asked them, why are your rates still the same? And their response was, we price our gas in the market, and we don't necessarily price it to that price point for a tax. That would be different if it was a higher tax, of course, I would think, but in that case it didn't. So that's a long answer to your question is no, we didn't track it back then, but we anecdotally discovered that we didn't see any increases in our gas prices when we went from 0 to 4. I don't know what happened when Bloomington went from 0 to 4. We do know or when it went from 4 to 8, we weren't sure it was prior to that. So.
Okay. Yeah, my thinking being, if when we were both the same, if there's a 3 cent on average difference while Bloomington is at the 8 cents and we're only at 4, they're still 3 cents cheaper on average, when we were both at 4, did they pick up that additional 4 cents in their spread, and were they roughly 7 cents cheaper than us back then, or was that 3 pretty consistent over the course of time? Is kind of the trend I was looking for. And
We
Um,
don't have that data, sorry.
yeah, no problem. Final question, if I may. I believe this was in one of the charts Mr. Hune had shown. When the state in July 1 of 19 imposed the additional 19 cents in their portion of the gas tax, did we see prices tend to rise by about 19 cents, or what sort of change in prices roughly were we seeing as an immediate result of that? And I believe that was in one of the charts that followed the actual prices.
Right.
Yeah, yes, we did see a pretty significant spike right there on July 1st. I would suspect, I can go back and look at the actual data in terms of the numbers we had, but if you look at the chart, we were averaging about 255, and it went up to closer to 290, even in almost $3 in some respects. So there was more than an increase of 19 cents in that time period. So probably some market issues drove gas that way. You know, the cost of oil changes the retailer's cost of gas too. So, but we did see a spike actually over and above the 19-cent increase during this data. But then, of course, since then, it's actually dropped well below what it was prior to that spike. So it's all kind of interesting numbers in terms of where it lands sometimes.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Ms. Cummings.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to thank Mr. Hune and Ms. Reese for this presentation, for there is a lot of information to digest. I think I may be adding on a little bit to Councilmember Smith's question, because I think we were headed down this particular, I think this is the path she was headed down. I know there are some things that have been brought up that we might use the MFT for, and I know we talk about transportation or transportation related. And so I know one of the things or concerns that we've received comments on is Connect Transit. Is there any other multimodal pieces that we could be adding? And then I have a follow-up after that, but are there any other multimodal pieces that we could use the MFT for?
Well, we have not considered anything specific. We have the Connect Transit request on the table because they had presented that to us. In terms of transportation systems, when I asked council to consider funding for that, certainly we're talking about roads, bridges. We're also talking sidewalks. We're talking ADA improvements, which we have been talking about for the past year. So these sorts of investments, I think, assist in transportation for all residents. And then, of course, on top of that was the public transit system, if that's what council would like to consider.
And then also speaking on the Connect Transit piece, I know at one point when we were discussing this, we talked about the fact that we haven't helped in their full match in order to get a full match from the state. Would this allow them the opportunity to finally quit leaving money on the table every year?
That is true. That is one of the Connect to the Future work group's recommendations was additional funding from both municipalities, which would increase the local share of Connect Transit funding, which then leverages additional dollars from the Illinois Department of Transportation. So right now, Connect Transit believes that they're leaving state dollars on the table. So if they can get some additional funds from both Bloomington and Normal, that does open up additional IDOT funding for them.
Okay. And then my last thing is, I know that there's also been this whole idea that some of the businesses would flee if we went to the 8%. And maybe you know or you don't know, but it'll be good to share whether or not did Bloomington see any gas stations leave their community after their 8 cent, the increase to 8 cents?
I'm not aware. I don't have any information on that topic. I don't know.
I can share that I talked to my counterpart in Bloomington often about this particular issue, and he didn't mention any closing of stations. He said they were pleasantly surprised to see their activity level remain pretty much consistent with what they were expecting with that 4 to 8 cent increase. So they didn't see any drop off or any changes in the revenue, or for the most part, any stations. And if I may, I just wanted to get back to Scott's question. I looked at the actual data from January 28th to the first day in July, and there was actually a 19-cent increase that first week, and then it peaked at about 25 cents, and then it started dropping down below again. So there was kind of an initial bump that now has kind of settled down a little further, but there was a spike from that 19 for the state water fuel tax.
Yeah, thanks.
And thank you.
Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of my questions have been asked already, but couple of process-oriented questions. If the gas tax were to go forward, I know that's not what we're discussing tonight, and we're not taking any votes. We're just having a conversation. But just refresh my memory, process, timing, how we go about all that, assuming if we were in the future to get this on the agenda and pass it.
Sure. If council wanted an ordinance to consider, we would present or we would put an ordinance on the agenda at any meeting. It could be the next meeting. It could be any time in the future. Once council adopts an ordinance that implements a motor fuel tax modification, it would take about 90 days, we believe, to make all the notifications and allow vendors to make adjustments in their system.
Okay.
Mr. Hune, is that? Okay, thank you.
So it's not one day, one thing, and it happens immediately. There's a process of notification and a delay. And all right. I'd like to echo the thanks to Mr. Hune and your team for collecting data to help inform us about what's really going on when we're considering actions like this. I know that this can be hard information to get, but I appreciate you guys checking our local gas station prices to actually give us some solid information. It's confirming that lightning apparently does strike twice, that Bloomington can raise gas prices and normal gas stations will follow suit. And the unfortunate part is it also seems to be true is that for over a year now, Bloomington residents are benefiting by getting those additional dollars for their roadways, and the town of Normal is not. Although if you're buying gas in the town of Normal, which I hope most of us are, buy local, pay your gas tax here in town if you're a resident, please, because they help your roadway. But we seem, if I'm understanding what you showed us, we seem to be paying for that gas tax increase that Bloomington put through, but not benefiting from the tax. Is that, am I interpreting that, or am I just missing the point of what you demonstrated to us in your slides?
I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay, it seems apparent, but I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something in this presentation here. So, you know, I said this, I don't know how many meetings ago when we were talking about this, and I asked for this to be put on a future agenda. I watched this, and I did to Ms. Cummings' question, I have talked to one council member in Bloomington and was told basically the same thing as Mr. Hune found from his counterpart is I believe the comment was pleasantly, surprisingly, they saw no dip in revenue or activity in Bloomington from what the information he saw as a council person, or an alderman rather. So it seems to be the case that there was little gas buying activity change there from what I was told. We're talking about we're talking about ADA, curb cut type activity. We're talking curb and gutter. We're talking roads. We're talking sidewalks. Signalization, I'm assuming, was also part of the potential use. So if we have to replace signals, stop signs, all of the road-related signalization, that's part of this, I'm assuming. I haven't heard that.
I will jump in and say traffic management for sure. Usually traffic signals are covered by the state motor fuel tax dollars, but
Okay.
yeah, traffic management systems, sure.
Okay. And then I'm assuming maintenance, which is our streets department. So they're out doing their whole patching thing and every spring and summer, and all of those activities for the regular routine maintenance is also covered under this. So basically anything from one side to the other that happens on our streets basically is included in this. Okay. Well, I haven't heard any opinions at this point based on what your data is telling us about and showing it again. That's very, very helpful to see it graphically, that the difference in what Bloomington's collecting and normal not seeing an increase like some were predicting us to see. It's good to see some actual data on that telling us that in fact was not true. Based on this data and our opportunity to get more road work done, I know that's been important to a lot of folks and me as well, that I'm supporting and supportive of us, moving forward with an ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a lot of hands up here, and we have a council meeting coming up in less than 15 minutes. So I'm going to ask Ms. Smith if you would take your questions to staff at a later time, and Ms. Lorenz and Mr. Nord. Ms. Lorenz going first. Please try not to cover what's been covered before. Just agree with it or disagree with it if you do. But we're going to need to wrap this up and give staff an indication of what we think we want to do.
Okay, my turn then.
You're ready.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to kind of pull the lens up for a little more of a macro level. Two questions, one for Mr. Otto, and then the other perhaps I think more appropriately for Mr. Hune. Mr. Otto, with the additional funds that this would generate, obviously, I'm sure you've got projects in mind that you would think could be included. Typically on a given year, what do you see as a good amount of dollars that are needed for the usual churn of projects and maintenance, be it capital or operating?
That's a hard question to answer. We've got a lot of needs as far as capital goes. Certainly resurfacing is always a need, as well as pavement preservation, sidewalk improvements, ADA ramp conversion and upgrades. So, and all these things, of course, the cost continues to increase. So I guess I'm not able to answer your question with an exact number of what the number of dollars we need every year is. But certainly the increase in the motor fuel tax could assist with a lot of the needs that we're seeing out there.
Okay, well, let me put it maybe a little differently, and maybe I should have led this with this. I mean, in my time on the council, I've seen us put kind of traditionally on a low anemic side, maybe $1.5, $2 million, something like that. On a high side, I've seen it, go north of 3 million on maybe one occasion. Maybe it was, I don't remember when it was, but so, let's say it's ranged from 1.5 on the low to maybe 3.5 or 4 on the high. This would put us more in a $3 million range to have kind of concretely at our use for road type of projects. Is that a fair statement to say?
I think that's a fair statement. Yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Lorenz, if I could, sorry to interrupt you, but if I could also jump in terms of our, 5-year budget cycle, what we're talking about is the equivalent of $5 million over our budget cycle that we would invest in the transportation system. I had asked Mr. Hune if he could if he could take a look and find out sort of what our annual average typically is. So Andrew, do you have that number? Because that might get at what you're thinking in terms of what we average, what we
Right.
typically spend.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, absolutely. We, the last 3 years, we've been spending pretty good, about $3.7 million a year in road work. That includes MFT and general fund contribution. And that's going to be for street resurfacing, repair, maintenance, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, everything. So I think your statement earlier about being low end 1.5, high end 4, that's probably pretty accurate in terms of our spending for the last few years. We spent actually over $4 million last year, 1920 on roadway work. The previous year we spent 2.4, and then the year before that we spent 4.6 million. So again, that's my $3.7 million average there for those last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And to add $1 million more on top of that would give the town significant more ability to attack the road situation.
Okay, and then while I've got you then in this, just briefly, what impact will this have on freeing up dollars that maybe aren't there anymore in the general fund? Because some of these dollars do come out of the general fund. So what's the impact that you see on the general fund from this, especially as we look at COVID recovery and economic recession?
Sure. Well, we do have some challenges this year in the budget process. We will recover, and this might just be kind of a 1-year challenge, and then we'll recover over a couple of years. But the fact that COVID has happened and we've had this economic shutdown for a while and people are reluctant to necessarily spend what they were spending in the past, we're not going to have as much money available in general fund to allocate that we thought we were going to have a year ago in our 5-year budget.
Right.
So that is going to have an impact, and we'll get more involved in that as the budget process continues. But that extra $1 million will obviously come in handy as we navigate out of this COVID
Right.
ditch per se.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Nord, you're up next. We got about 5 minutes, which is about what everybody's been taking, so we can close this out and start our council meeting on time. So Mr. Nord.
Okay. Mr. Hune, the sales tax for motor fuel, is that included in repairing the roads, or is that left in the general fund?
Oh, Andrew, you're muted.
Sorry, that comes over to general fund as sales tax and is allocated at the discretion of the budget. So it's not necessarily routed towards roadway fund.
Okay, so we're not using the sales tax towards the roadway funds. Then, since the LMFT money goes straight into the general fund.
I apologize to interrupt you, sir. A lot of the money that comes over in sales tax, our total transportation investment is more than just the capital numbers I was quoting, the $4 million or the $1 million from what we get for a 4% tax rate. We also have probably $5 million of operating expense with our Public Works Streets Department, Engineering Department, and that's supported from sales tax. So there's other road transportation investment going on that's operating that we didn't really speak of just now, but it's significant. So in a way, that money is still supporting some of that operation. So just a mild distinction.
Sure. And any savings that are found in the general fund, since we put the LMFT money in the general fund and just avert a dollar amount over, would it be fair to say that if we found savings elsewhere in the general fund that we could push those over to fix roads as well?
We generally could. We try to operate within the financial strategies that we place. So we are trying to have a 15% reserve in the general fund. So, savings depend on the quantity and what the project is, and then we prioritize projects. So in theory, yes, we could absolutely move money over to the roadway fund, or we may need to keep it in our reserves to meet our goals.
And when the state raised the state fuel tax, did the town get additional money because of that?
We did. They did not hold us harmless of that. They actually did share that revenue with us. And you would probably note in the budget, we significantly increased motor fuel tax MFT fund for that additional revenue. I think we had about I don't want to talk, at least $500,000 more in revenue that we've been able to program, probably even more than that as it's come in. So that 19-cent increase did also impact the municipalities and impacted us to have more revenue for roads.
Okay, and that wasn't shown in the graphs, correct? The additional funds that we got.
No, yeah, those graphs, exactly, yeah, correct.
Okay, then.
You can see it in the budget document though.
Yeah, now, does Bloomington have more gas station and sell more volume of fuel than normal?
They do. I think we have about 17 gas stations here in Normal. I want to say Bloomington was like 24. And they also, they have a little more volume than we do and collect obviously a little more than we do for their 4 cents and then for their 8 cents too. They collected about 2.3 million prior to their 8 cent from their new 4 cent increase. So at 8 cents, they're getting about $4.6 million a year in motor fuel tax, local motor fuel tax.
And they also have several truck stops that consume a lot of fuel or dispense a lot of fuel too, that Normal does not have.
That's correct.
Mhm.
Okay, my thought on this is, I don't want to raise taxes on our residents. This is a pandemic time. A lot of our residents don't have as much money coming in, or they've lost the ability to earn an income for at least a significant period this year. So the term death by 1,000 taxes, even though this one may not sound like a lot of money, it is still yet another tax. And for those of us that earn a significant amount of money, 4 cents may not sound like a lot, but to the lower income, this is going to affect them more than it will the higher earners. I would like to see the town try and save money elsewhere. And then as far as it was in the news that some of this was going to be diverted to Connect Transit. My feeling is I would not want to divert money to Connect Transit until the IGA is updated and that they are following it, because right now they're operating without accountability and not following the IGA. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
And
Just out of clarification, Mayor, I'm not exactly sure how things were articulated in the media reports. My communication to council was simply the Connect Transit request does need to be addressed, and this could be a potential funding source. No guarantees, it's just up for discussion.
thank you. So we're coming up on a time. I think we need to give staff some direction in terms of, do we want this to go forward? My feeling is if we want it to go forward, we should move it right along, especially giving that 90-day delay. So I'm just going to ask council members, this is not a vote, this is just getting your recommendation to move this to staff to bring at a future meeting. So if you just raise your hand, if you would like to see this move to the next step. So that is 4 yes and 3 no. So we'll bring this up to the next, when staff feels they're ready to bring this forward. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
We have to sign out of this Zoom meeting, so we're going to adjourn and then sign into a new one, just so you're aware. You should have another Zoom invitation for the next meeting. So we'll see you in a few minutes.
Thank you.